The magical powers of human beings. Friends, tonight we will begin our esoteric talk. Unquestionably, magical powers exist within human beings. Many psychic experiments have indeed been conducted. I am going to recount a few. Some time ago, a remarkable event occurred in Merville, California. In the presence of the Fox sisters, the most extraordinary things happened. Tables would lift and float in the air on their own, stones were thrown by invisible hands, windows opened and closed by themselves, and so forth. A scientist decided to investigate. His name was William Crookes, the man who introduced radiant matter in glass tubes. The experiment was formidable, extraordinary, and marvelous. He placed these young women in a secure chamber, tying them up with copper wires. He even passed very fine wires through their ear holes, making it impossible for them to perform any tricks. However, in the presence of scientists gathered for the experiment, a spirit named Katie King would visibly and tangibly manifest. She was the spirit of a young woman, aged 25, who had died long ago and made herself visible and tangible to all the scientists. Photographs were taken of her, and it was confirmed that no trickery was involved. If the mediums, the young women who served as mediums, tried to make any movement, a bell would ring. Thus, any possibility of fraud was ruled out, yet the ghost appeared, becoming visible and tangible. Many skeptical materialists came to debunk what they considered a fraud but left fully convinced. They came intending to expose the fraud, but rather than revealing any deception, they left thoroughly convinced. The phenomenon, therefore, was concrete, and in the presence of scientists, the spirit of Katie King materialized for 3 years. After 3 years, she bid farewell to everyone, embracing them, and told them that she had come to fulfill a mission, to tell them that the soul is truly immortal, and to reveal that the beyond exists. She slowly dematerialized in front of the cameras and even left a lock of her hair as a keepsake, leaving no room for doubt. Much earlier, in Naples, Italy, a woman named Eusapia Palladino was known for her extraordinary mediumistic abilities. In her presence, tables would lift on their own, and extraordinary events would also occur. Scientists tied her to steel posts and bound her body with electric wires, so any movement she attempted would immediately trigger a bell, etc. Experiments to determine the truth behind these metapsychic occurrences. After all, one must investigate an experiment to see what lies beyond. The most interesting occurrence was when the dead mother of a man named Battazzi appeared in the middle of the room and even allowed a photograph to be taken of her. Musical instruments were placed in hermetically sealed steel boxes, and yet, these instruments would play. What hands were causing them to resonate? Plates of flour were set out, and invisible hands left imprints on those plates of flour. Eusapia Palladino was examined and proven to have a normal body. Experiments of such magnitude invite one to reflect. How can a mandolin rise into the air and be played by invisible hands? It's one of the many cases that occurred in the presence of Eusapia Palladino in Naples. And what can we say of that other medium, Home, from France? In Paris, he would put his face into hot coals without burning himself. He levitated flying with his chair into the air, and on one occasion, he was seen rising into the air while seated and moving with the chair out one balcony and in through another. And this was happening on a high floor of a building. Thus, there are magical phenomena worth studying, phenomena that amaze. And that is precisely why we are here. You are here to listen to me, and I am here to speak to you, and I believe we can understand each other. Let's talk about magic, spiritism, and magical powers. It is worth our time to discuss, investigate, and see what truth exists in all of this. A few months ago, something unusual happened in Guanajuato. A crowd was gathered in the plaza when suddenly, a woman appeared from the clouds and fell into the middle of the plaza. "A witch!" everyone shouted, "She's a witch!" And the crowd rushed to lynch her. Fortunately, the police saved the poor woman, took her into custody, and even allowed people to visit her. But what really happens in all these situations? During the Inquisition in the Middle Ages, witches were burned alive at the stake. But do witches really exist? That is what we will ask ourselves. They say witches don't exist, but if they do, as the popular saying goes, and it's worth exploring a bit of each matter. Let's continue. If the famous medium Home, from Paris, the one who put his face into hot coals and could also float through the air, engaged in such things as sorcery, I have also heard that saints fly. Saint Francis of Assisi was often found by his beloved disciple floating above the ground when the disciple would bring him food. He couldn't feed the saint because he was too high for the disciple to reach him. Then Francis would fly, the story says, through the beeches of a forest filled with trees, and disappear. History is filled with saints who flew through the air. Well, those were not burned at the stake. Indeed, life must contain everything. There will be saints and also devils, and there is everything in this world, in all of creation, but we must investigate to understand what is happening. We need to unravel these mysteries. And I invite you to join me in reflecting a bit. I am here, thinking out loud. If you are listening, I am glad you are listening. Well, let us continue onward. The history of our Anahuac ancestors holds astonishing accounts. It is said that Moctezuma, the powerful lord of Anahuac, summoned the most elite of his court one day. He called Tlacaelel and said, "Well, I need to know where our ancestors are. Where is the wisest of all, Quetzalcoatl? Where is Quetzalcoatl's mother? Where are all our ancient heroes?" And Tlacaelel replied, "Lord, it is very difficult to reach where they live. They dwell in distant Thule, and it is so far away that there is no way to reach it. In another time, it was possible to get there, but now the path is closed and filled with thickets, thorns, brambles, and bottomless lagoons. Only through magic or witchcraft could anyone reach that place where Lord Quetzalcoatl, Huitzilopochtli, and the mother of Huitzilopochtli live, among others. It is a whole pantheon, with so many names that it is hard to remember them all. Luckily, I haven't forgotten Tlacaelel and the anxiety he felt trying to respond to the mighty Lord Moctezuma." Moctezuma then recalled a great sage living in the forest and said, "I will consult him." And upon arriving before the old man, he greeted him with deep reverence and said, "Tell me, venerable elder, you who know the history of our beloved Mexican land, tell me, what do you know of our ancestors? What do you know of Huitzilopochtli? What of our Lord Quetzalcoatl? What of our ancient guides?" The elder replied, "They, my lord, indeed live in distant Thule. It is difficult to reach, but it is possible through magical means. The best option is to gather the 60 elders and entrust them with this mission." Moctezuma thanked him and returned to his palace. He then summoned the 60 venerable elders and said, "I want you to bring gifts to our ancestors who dwell in distant Thule. I know you are magicians, so go and consult them to hear what they say about us." The 60 obeyed, and Moctezuma gave them fabulous gifts to take to the ancestors of ancient Mexico. According to the ancient tradition, the 60 applied certain substances to their bodies and invoked Colitl. Thus, Colitl Lucifernawa granted them power, allowing the elders to suspend themselves in the air, entering the unknown dimension. I don't know if any of you have seen that film called The Time Tunnel. If you have, you can get an idea of what that unknown dimension, the fourth dimension, is like. Here, you see this table. It has 3 dimensions, length, width, and height. But there is a 4th dimension, which is time. How long ago did the carpenter build this table? There you have the 4th dimension. Obviously, the 4th dimension exists. It cannot be seen with these eyes of flesh and bone, but it does exist, and if one develops what they call clairvoyance, then it can be seen. Well, continuing with this pleasant conversation, I will tell you that those 60 entered the 4th dimension, traveling like those characters from the time tunnel, through the unknown dimension, and they indeed reached the North Pole, where it is said there is a shining sacred island called the Crystal Island, and there they were received by the ancestors of the Aztecs. These elders presented their gifts, but the ancestors of the Aztecs said, "Tell Moctezuma and his people, and the Prime Minister, Tlacaelel, that if they don't change their ways, if they don't stop getting drunk on so much pulque, if they don't end the human sacrifices, white, bearded men will come from across the sea and enslave and destroy you." The story continues, saying that the 60 returned again through the atmosphere, through the fourth dimension, to Mexico Tenochtitlan and delivered the message to Moctezuma and his prime minister, Tlacaelel. But Moctezuma and Tlacaelel wept greatly. Moreover, the mother of Huitzilopochtli gave Moctezuma a girdle as a symbol of chastity, and Moctezuma accepted it. The venerable matron intended to tell him that he should become less of a lady's man, more chaste and pure, to have the strength to rule ancient Mexico Tenochtitlan, the great Tenochtitlan. Observe these accounts. I read them from a very venerable priest, a highly respected father, Father Duran, a historian. He was no charlatan. If Father Duran said this, he had his reasons for doing so. Continuing with these fascinating topics, I believe that the woman who fell in the plaza of Guanajuato and was taken into custody, a witch from the midnight Sabbaths of the 1001 Nights, must have traveled through the fourth dimension, like those characters from the time tunnel. What went wrong was that the poor woman abandoned the fourth dimension and fell in the middle of the plaza. In the days of the Inquisition, she would have been burned at the stake, but since we're no longer in those times, they settled for putting her in jail. Let's continue with these topics. I keep thinking out loud, and I ask you to join me in contemplating them a bit. There are faculties such as clairvoyance. Who can deny it? They exist, and there is a simple method to awaken clairvoyance. I will teach you the secret to becoming clairvoyant. See here, I have this glass of water. I'll take a little sip. It's actually good, isn't it? Look, you place the glass like this, in front of you, filled with water as you see here. Then, concentrate on the water so that your gaze passes through the glass and lands exactly in the center of the water, here, in the center of the circle, in the point of the circle, but your gaze must pass through the glass and land on the center of the circle. It is a very simple exercise, just 10 minutes each day. After 15 or 20 days, you will begin to see the water turn colors, colors of the fourth dimension that exist and that you will be able to see. Then, after about 3 to 4 or, at most, 6 months, if a car passes on the street, you will see the street as a ribbon of light, and through that ribbon of light, you will see the car. It will appear tiny, but you will see it. In 3 years, I tell you this in the name of truth, sincerely, because I practiced this exercise, you will reach a point where you no longer need this glass of water. You will be able to see what is called the invisible, what is called the unknown dimension. And it is interesting to become a seer because a seer can see what is beyond, where the departed live. The seer can see what is known as the mysteries of life and death. The seer can see angels. They exist. Angels are a truth. Religion has taught the truth. Angels, archangels, principalities, powers, virtues, dominions, thrones, cherubim, seraphim, they all exist. The thing is, people nowadays have become very skeptical. What would happen if the people had no religion? A people without religion, honestly, is a failure. I tell you this straight, like a man, it's a failure. The time has come to have a little more faith. If you have faith and practice this exercise for 10 minutes a day, you'll become clairvoyant. Nothing bad will happen, you just have to stop being afraid. If one day, say at midnight, a little witch appears, don't be scared. Don't be scared, give it a few blessings, say a prayer and you'll see nothing happens. There is another faculty that is truly amazing. I want to refer to the magic ear. This magic ear is right here, in the throat. Clairvoyance is up here, but the magic ear is here, in the throat. To be able to hear the conversations of the angels up there, from the rooftop and above, isn't bad. To be able to hear things happening at a distance is magnificent. But there's a problem with the gossips because once they hear what their husband or neighbor said, things get complicated. But yes, one can develop the magic ear, and do you know how? At dawn, and I'll give you this exercise so you can try it for yourselves. At dawn, you should deeply concentrate on the music of the spheres. Haven't you heard of the music of heaven? It exists, that's very true. Remember that song, Los Mananitas, where it says, I wish I were Saint John, I wish I were Saint Peter, to come greet you with the music of heaven. Well, it's true, the music of heaven exists, yes, even Pythagoras clearly spoke to us about the music of the spheres. And speaking to you scientifically this time, I'll tell you that all the sounds produced here on earth, from the noise of a lousy truck to the song of a bird, all of them, form a single unique sound, which is the keynote of the earth. Now, other planets also have their keynote, and that's interesting. When these keynotes combine, they produce the music of the spheres. Once, a saint who was preaching to the masses felt that ineffable music and entered into ecstasy, but he remained in ecstasy, never returning. They just took him to the cemetery. That was serious, right? Well, I don't think you'll end up in such a state, right? At least, I don't wish it for you, but you can develop the sense of clairaudience. Now then, it's a marvelous sense. Imagine this, with clairvoyance, one can see the ineffable beings, with clairaudience one can hear them. To see and hear, how interesting. I've known true clairvoyance in my life, I think you have too. Now and then, you might have met one, true ones exist. Of course, one must differentiate the true ones from the charlatans, of course, but the true clairvoyant can genuinely see the mysteries of life and death. But one must practice. If you don't practice, when will you develop clairvoyance? Much has been said about the matter of apparitions, of people in what they call the death rattle. The family, those who were with her at her deathbed, felt her out in the garden, watering flowers as she always did. Well, around 3 in the morning, she lifted a heavy wooden bar that served to lock doors, since people didn't have such fancy locks as they do now. And that was it. Yet, at that same time, a neighbor saw her, she went over, said goodbye, and hugged her. Then, not only did she visit the neighbor but went to see all her relatives, saying goodbye to each of them and inviting them to her funeral. By morning, without needing to hand out invitations, which was cheaper, of course, the place was full of people in mourning. This is a fact that I know firsthand, exact and concrete. It's not something I read in some silly book or pamphlet, no, it's something I witnessed myself. Let's continue. It has been proven that when someone passes away, they become visible and tangible at a distance. How is that? Why? Once, I had an extraordinary experience that I'll share with you. It happened when I was walking along those back roads, from village to village. I wasn't as well known as I am now. I was there, carrying my old clothes in a backpack. Those were different times, traveling on foot along the roads. I arrived at a village, it doesn't matter which one, since I don't like to speak ill of anyone, and looked for a place to stay. I only had about 20 cents in my pocket. Who would rent me a room for 20 cents? I found a boarding house that rented out beds. I was so lucky, with my 20-cent coin, I could afford it, they were very cheap. I asked the owner, Madam, I need a place to stay because, frankly, I'm tired, very cold, and hungry. The woman took pity on me and gave me a bed, the only one left in a room full of beds. Just as I was about to fall asleep, someone knocked at the door, a new guest asking for a bed. This time, the owner told him, Friend, there aren't any left, look, the room is full. The man begged as I had. Finally, she offered him a mat on the floor. He lay down on it right in front of me, directly across from me. And it happened that I was observing the man because he was lying right across from me. I watched him, and suddenly, he was moving from side to side, and I saw a grey cloud, like lead, escaping from his pores, from his body, above the blankets, an amorphous cloud. But then, that cloud began to stand up, that is, it became vertical, and it took the shape of a human body. And so, it became fully formed into a man, resembling the man lying there. It looked at me and left. Where did it go? Only the gods know where it went at that hour, but it left, the body remained there. So, you see, that's what happens during sleep, that thing inside you, which they call the soul or spirit, and I don't know what else they might call it, that's what leaves the body during sleep, and of course, the body stays there in bed, asleep, or on the floor if one doesn't have a bed, but it stays there. The problem is when it doesn't come back. Well, that's precisely death. With death, that thing inside you, the soul, leaves and never comes back, it leaves that body, and when it returns, it will be in a new body, but that's a topic we'll study later. Today, I'll focus only on discussing these magic powers, which are well worth studying. There's something very interesting, if during sleep, that is, what we have inside, our soul, leaves the body as it falls asleep and goes to the other side, dreaming things and later remembering them. What happened? Simply, it saw the places it went to. If someone falls asleep and suddenly dreams they're at the Zocalo, and then wakes up at the Zocalo in San Luis, well, certainly, that thing inside, that soul or spirit, call it what you like, actually went to the Zocalo. It saw the Zocalo and came back, and on returning says, "What a funny dream, I was at the Zocalo, what was I doing there?" But it really was there. Now, if that happens involuntarily, I ask, why not make it happen voluntarily? Yes, it's possible, it's not difficult. I'll give you a very simple key, try it at home, and you'll see it yields excellent results, but please don't get frightened, please don't be afraid. I'll give you the key, it's very simple, lie down tonight with your head toward the north, in a dorsal position, that is, face up, with the body well relaxed, I mean with loose muscles, none tensed, nice and relaxed. And fall asleep while checking your sleep, monitoring it, checking it. It's easy to doze off while keeping track of your sleep, but don't lose sleep over it, because there's work tomorrow, and then, how will you handle work, right? Doze off while monitoring your sleep, yes, that's how you do it. And then, when you start to have strange dream-like thoughts, the thing is in great shape. At that moment, all you have to do is swing your legs out of the bed, since the first thing to do is to get your legs out of bed to sit up, if that's what you want to do, of course. And then, you simply stand up but gently. Now, as you're swinging your legs to sit up, identify with your soul, feel yourself as spirit, feel yourself as light, like air, like something strange, and forget about this heavy flesh and bone body. Sit up, yes, sit, and once sitting, stand up slowly, softly, and then look back at the bed to see what you see. If you see that your body is still in bed, don't get scared, no, please don't get scared. Then, softly, walk out to the street. Once outside, give a little jump with the intention of floating in the air, you are in the unknown dimension. In that state, you can travel anywhere without a ticket, you can go to Paris, you can go to London, you can go to Egypt, to Tibet, wherever you want. The most interesting thing is that outside the body, you can learn what lies on the other side. There you can meet relatives who passed away long ago, yes, they come to embrace you, but please don't get frightened, and if you touch them, they're cold as ice, that's clear. And, do you know why the deceased are so cold? Simply because in life, they never aimed to receive the holy fire. There is a holy fire, which is that of the Holy Spirit, but they never cared to receive the Holy Spirit. They were so busy that they didn't have time to think about it, they were thinking about the rent, the neighborhood gossip, what the neighbor said, the car payment, etc., etc., etc. In short, they never cared to receive the sacred fire of the Holy Spirit. But angels are different, they're another story. If one approaches an angel, one feels it radiates fire, it burns. And outside the physical body, one can truly invoke the angels, and they come. If you invoke the Archangel Raphael, for example, to cure an illness, the Archangel Raphael comes. So, that's when you realize that what religion teaches about angels and saints is true. And if you invoke, for example, the Archangel Anael or Uriel, the archangels of love, music, and beauty, they will come to you. If you ask for teachings from one of these divine beings, they give it, and you can study at the feet of that divine being. In the unknown dimension, you can call upon the divine beings and speak with them. I don't see anything wrong with that. What could be wrong? Some say it could be dangerous, but why? Because in any case, when the body sleeps, the soul is outside. If the soul remained in the skin, I assure you one wouldn't be able to fall asleep. So, it is indeed very true that one can transcend. Therefore, learning to become aware of one's own functions is formidable, extraordinary. In experimental psychology, this phenomenon is called unfolding. Of course, some texts explain it, but with 50,000 technical terms, and if I were to cite all those complex, verbose terms, you simply wouldn't understand them. I would end up talking only to myself, speaking a foreign language. Now then, let's talk a bit about mental force. I say that mental force is powerful. Through it, one can accomplish wonders and marvels. For example, if one focuses their mind on a person who intends to harm them, concentrating their mental force, those mental waves cross space and reach the person. Mentally, one can suggest to that person not to harm them, to see the error in causing harm, as there's no need to bring harm upon oneself. You can prevent harm to yourself simply through mental force. You can advise people from afar using the power of thought. When one thinks of someone, they emit waves, mental waves. These waves travel through space, moving from one mind to another. Although invisible to the physical eyes, these mind waves exist and can even take human forms. At this moment, I recall the case of a lady named David Neal. She went to Tibet and lived among the Tibetan monks for 10 years. One day, she set out to create a figure of a monk using that mental substance, which comes from within, from deep inside the brain, although it's not visible to the naked eye, and she visualized the monk daily until she created him with imagination. The most alarming part is that this monk came to have strength, and when people came looking for David Neal, the English lady, they would find themselves face to face with the monk. But David Neal got herself into a grave situation, in what we'd call a tight spot. Do you know what happened? Eventually, that mental monk no longer obeyed her, began to act independently, and even turned aggressive, so things were getting serious. The lady was extremely frightened and consulted an abbot of a monastery. All the monks in that monastery had to struggle greatly to disintegrate that mental form she had created. It took them about 6 months to dissolve it. If they hadn't succeeded, I assure you it would have cost her life. David Neal would have become a victim of her own creation, and that's nothing pleasant, right? Thus, mental force is astonishing, formidable, and marvelous. It's worth developing this force, but for good, to heal the sick, to suggest to those who hate us that they stop hating us, to repel dangers, and so forth. If one knows that an assailant is coming with the intent to shoot, one could mentally concentrate on the assailant, saying, "Why would you commit this madness? Go somewhere else with your bullets and leave me in peace," and I'm sure that with such mental force, we could make the assailant flee. There are secrets for making oneself invisible. They truly exist. Remember that Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ, became invisible when they intended to stone him. He passed through the crowd, making himself invisible at will. All of these are extraordinary phenomena, powers that one can develop. Now, what shall we say about the notion of placing one's body in the fourth dimension, to travel like the knights from the time tunnel, through the unknown dimension? It's possible, it can be done. I also recall a curious case. Icarus, it is said, wanted to fly in Rome and had wings made of wax. He announced to everyone in Rome that he would fly, took a leap, and instead of going up, went down and crashed. Poor thing. The other day I heard of an apprentice sorcerer who was told to climb onto a roof at midnight and jump. The poor guy did it, jumped, but he ended up killing himself. So, I'm telling you about things that might seem comical, even amusing, but now, let's get to the facts. Yes, it's possible to place the physical body into the fourth dimension. Indeed, it can be done. Patanjali, for example, was a great yogi from India. He taught his disciples how to place their physical bodies into the fourth dimension. They could walk on fire without being burned, clearly because the body was within the fourth vertical, so there was no problem. That is a fact. I hope you can do it too. Well, I can, I'm not denying it, I learned how, and you can learn too. It's not difficult, a year of training is all it takes. Patanjali said this, that one must practice asamayama. It's a strange word, and this is the first time I'm using a rare term in this talk. Asamayama, he said, consists of 3 stages: first, concentration; second, meditation; third, ecstasy. But I'll explain this to you. Concentration means fixing the mind on a single thing, that's called concentration. If, for example, I focus my mind here on this glass, I'm concentrating. Meditation is thinking about what that thing is, on which you've concentrated. If I concentrate on this glass and see that it has a bit of water, I'm concentrating because my mind is focused there. Meditation is reflecting on what this glass is, what the water is. But there's a third phase, ecstasy. When one realizes that this glass, this water, everything in creation exists because God wanted it to, one worships God so deeply that one enters the saint's ecstasy. Well, these are the 3 components of asamayama. If one concentrates on their physical body, meditates on it, and then realizes that it exists because God gave it to them, one enters into ecstasy, in gratitude to God, in worship. If one manages to enter this saint's ecstasy, one can perform wonders because Patanjali says that in that moment, the body becomes as light as cotton, for it penetrates, he says, into the unknown dimension. With the body immersed in the unknown dimension, one can walk on fire without being burned, walk on water without sinking, pass through a mountain from side to side without any harm, or float among the clouds. These are wonders. In India, there are yogis who do this. Yoga has marvels, it's formidable. There are yogis who levitate, floating in the air, it's extraordinary. I remember Milarepa, a great yogi of Tibet. In a state of ecstasy, he would leave his cave with his body placed within the fourth dimension, floating over the snow-covered Himalayan mountains. People would see him, it was a reality. And after traveling through the Himalayas like this, he would return to his cave. David Neal tells us about the semi-flying ascetics of Tibet, who cover vast distances with their bodies in the fourth vertical. They half walk, half float, and can transport themselves from one place to another in an instant, crossing huge distances in minutes. So, it's a reality, it exists. In esoteric science, do you know what that's called? It's known as jhana states or the science of the jhanas. It's said that some lakes are enchanted, as well as certain mountains. There are lakes and mountains that are situated within the fourth dimension, that's all, but they do exist. In Mexico, over in Chapultepec in the Federal District, we have a temple in the state of jhanas, a temple placed within the fourth vertical. Well, ancient codices say that the tiger knights would arrive at that temple in the form of a tiger, and then would assume human form to enter the holy place. The tiger knights would place their physical bodies within the fourth vertical, that's all, and they knew how to do it wonderfully. So, I'm talking about facts, concrete facts. In that temple in Chapultepec, there's something very sacred. There is nothing less than a copy of the Holy Grail. Do you know what the Holy Grail is? It's the cup from which Jesus drank wine at the Last Supper. It's said that Joseph of Arimathea managed to hide this cup. But the interesting part is that before he hid it, he was there with the cup at the foot of Golgotha, and he filled the cup with the blood of the Redeemer of the world. Afterward, he also collected the lance with which Longinus pierced the Lord's side. He took both the cup and the lance home, buried, and hid them. When the Roman police came to search for these treasures, they couldn't find them. Joseph of Arimathea refused to surrender such relics. For not doing so, he was imprisoned, and after spending many years in prison, he sought out Christians in Rome. When he arrived in Rome, he found Nero persecuting Christians. So he continued along the shores of the Mediterranean. One night, in a dream, an angel appeared to him and said, "This cup is very sacred because it holds the blood of the Redeemer of the world. Bury it there." And in a clairvoyant vision, he was shown nothing less than the mountain of Catalonia, the Mount Montserrat in Catalonia, Spain. Joseph of Arimathea, with the chalice and the lance, went to that place where there was a temple. It's said that Joseph of Arimathea stored the chalice and lance in that temple. However, that temple was submerged within the fourth dimension, became invisible to the physical eyes, intangible to the physical hands. Since then, it has remained invisible. During the Middle Ages, numerous knights constantly sought the sacred cup, and in the Crusades, they sought the Holy Grail. Many people during the Crusades went to the Holy Land in search of the Holy Grail and the Holy Sepulchre, and